So season 3 of Bridgerton brought us a lot of gems, and one thing it's got me thinking about is invisibility. The plight of the women in Bridgerton is largely invisible to the men that they're supposed to marry, right? The men are at these balls like, oh my god, this is so annoying. The mamas are so annoying. You got Benedict dodging them. Anthony was annoyed. Simon was annoyed. Marriage is an annoying eventuality for them because afterwards they can still do whatever they want. Like Lord Debling, who wanted to get married, he was out looking for a wife, but then his plan was to just leave her to take care of house and home and be pregnant while he was out for months on end, following his passion, living out his passion, while she was just like supposed to be satisfied with taking care of his estate, right? Meanwhile, the women are fighting for their lives. Their moms are like, shoulders back, spine straight, put down those books, pick up the pianoforte. Do not let that man know that you can think. Do you want to be homeless? Like, they are fighting for their lives, and these anxieties are invisible to the men who are so privileged in this world. Similarly, this whole thing that Eloise is always on about, like, oh, women are more than their wombs. Why do we have to be trotted out like cattle or whatever every season on display for a man to pick us? We've got Penelope also with her business. What a triumph. Oh my God, what a win for women that Penelope has her own business. What a thing she has made for herself to be self-sustaining. This is valid, but it's less valid if you remember the lower class. If you pay attention to the number of women who are working to sustain these rich women, right? If you see Madame Delacroix, if you see Mrs. Varley as more than just the lady who's, making sure that the feathering things can go on. Because she is out here supporting the hell out of Portia. Mrs. Varley is the one keeping that household together. But she has to be invisible to a certain extent for there's a hypocrisy. There is these very women who are complaining, rightfully so, about their plight. There's no intersectionality. Like Eloise, there's no intersectionality. Eloise leaves talking about, she needs to go see the world if she's to change it, but change it for whom? Eloise doesn't talk to poor people, except for that boy. She doesn't talk to the lower class unless it's to ask them to bring her more tea or to run her a bath. And it's just so interesting. And the closest we came to this being spotlighted, like that difference, the fact that the lower class have the freedoms that these rich women in gilded cages have, the closest we came was with the Mondrich storyline this season, where they were about to be ostracized for being self-sustaining. Maybe if Colin had a job, he wouldn't have needed to find himself. I'm joking, but am I? And again, on the invisibility between the privileged and the non-privileged, you had Colin, right? In that scene with Cressida, where Colin was like, I get it. I too know what it's like to be lost. When I was exploring France by myself and also Greece by myself, I was so lost. And Cressida was like, for that flex, the price has doubled. It's very fun for me to think about. The show does such a great job of just putting these issues in front of our face. And yes, with the gender stuff, with the race stuff, it's explicit. And I don't think it has been so with the class stuff. Only when that printer boy called out Eloise for of course you're gonna look out for yourself. Of course, so he said something to her about the difference between them in terms of their class. But it's right there for us to pick up on it if we so choose. If we can look past the interesting rich people and see the lower class that is helping them sustain their lives. And I will say, Mrs. Mondrich went from she became more. If the wealth had come from her husband, she would have gone from a secure position as a working class woman to a vulnerable position. And as a matter of fact, her daughters are not going to be vulnerable to the same gilded cage thing that Cressida and Portia and Lady Danbury had to deal with where like these rich people, the reason, part of the reason why these women are suffering so much is because they insist on keeping the wealth, circulating between them. They're being forced to marry to keep the title, the land, the money circulating in the hands of a few families. Good thing for Mrs. Mondrish, the wealth came from her family, but it's going to be another scenario for her daughters. But I will say, another good thing for Mrs. Mondrish is that her husband is probably the least chauvinistic man in the Bridgerton world because he was not rich. And when Mr. Mondrish was looking like uncomfortable with like coming into the wealth and being told he's gonna have to close his club, I actually was waiting for him to say like, how am I gonna take care of you? Like, what use of my, what essentially what Colin said to Penelope, but they sidestepped that issue. And since they did, I'm going to fill in the gap and say that it's because he doesn't have that mindset. That wasn't drilled into him like that because he's not moneyed. Instead, Mr. Mondrich's heartache was the fact that he was being asked to give up the club that he worked so hard for. This was supposed to be how he was going to take care of his family, how he and his wife were going to take care of their kids. This was the height of success, and his whole thing was to lean into the uncertainty of this luck that came upon them. I'm sure, like, again, like what ails like the upper class ails, also ails the lower class. But also because the working class don't have to worry about like keeping money circulating, like a large sum of money, large sum of resources circulating. The women are not like, I'm sure their parents care about like, make sure you treat my daughter right, but it's not go marry this old ass man because he's got the resources and like we need to get our money up. You need to go marry that man. So they have the freedoms that the Eloises and the Penelopes and the Portias are lacking. They have the wiggle room, and yet there is no mixing, like there is no acknowledgement of the lower class. They only exist to serve the Portias, the Penelopes, and the etc. I just find that interesting, and it's another thing that like the fact that season 3 brought this to my mind is another reason why it is such a strong and interesting season.